Hey guys, what's up? This is Cyclonic here, bringing you guys a video today on basics in Photoshop. So, there's plenty of these kind of videos out there that give an intro to the tools and stuff. What I'm going to try to do to make this video a bit more worth your time is to, or a bit more, I should say, set apart from the rest of them, is that I want to tailor it specifically to things the 2K community would want. So, for example, a lot of the upcoming content creators, they're going to want to be able to make thumbnails, for example. So I'm not the best at making thumbnails. I haven't really delved into it much, but as far as the basics go, there's a good way to also just get familiarized with Photoshop in general. So first thing we're going to want to do is pull in some type of picture. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I'm just going to reiterate them here. First way is just go to Open, and then let's go to Open. Let's go ahead and pull in a 2K picture. Let's take in one of Toxic's. You can go, they'll typically come in locked here, so you just click this and it'll unlock it. Then from here you can either do two things. You can just go duplicate layer and move it to the right one like that, and it'll duplicate it over here. Or what you can do is control click on the icon, select the whole thing, and make sure this layer is like actually selected. Control C to copy, Control V to paste in here, and do what you need to do. And then bother resizing this a bit later. The last way to pull an image in, and one that I personally use quite a lot, place embedded. And that way I can just pull this in here and it'll be at a normal size, a decent size for me anyway. So we're going to go ahead and make this a kind of background real quick. So we'll do it like that. Maybe just extend this out to the size of the canvas. So while I'm talking about canvases, important thing to note, let's say this picture right here, let's say you just open this picture and start from this picture and it's a size that you don't want. There's a way to resize the canvas so it is a perfect size. So if you go to image, canvas size, changing this just changes the artboard size. It does not modify the picture at all. So for example, if I go 500 width, it's just going to clip off a certain amount of this, but the picture will still be there. So that's what canvas size does. So if it's not at 1920 by 1080, you can put it to that and then resize everything else as necessary. Then let's say you wanted to maybe just make the overall image smaller or stretch it out. Do something, anything you want with it, but make sure that the picture is affected too. Can make this like maybe 500, and you'll notice that it will end up, once it goes through this, it's going to actually resize the entire thing to 500 by 281. So we did it like that. So just a little note there. So now we have this picture in here. And then let's say we wanted to cut Toxic out of the background to kind of, maybe highlight him a bit more. So there are four ways that you can cut him out. 3 of them aren't exactly reliable, but are good for a quick cutout, and then one of them is the preferred way to do it. So let's start off with the 3 low quality ways to do it. This tool over here, you can get it by hitting W, and there are 2 tools, a quick selection and the magic wand. You can cycle through them by holding shift and then hitting W, and you'll notice it's cycling through them right now. So the magic wand tool, basically when you click somewhere, based on this tolerance number, it's going to find all the pixels nearby that connect to the pixel you hit that are all within like the same color range. So if I click here, you'll notice it's trying to select a lot of the white. And then if we increase the tolerance a lot more, you'll notice more of it is selected. Even this grayer stuff is considered under that tolerance. So we're going to switch it back to 32, which is the default. So you'll notice it's not the best way to go around and select everything, because you'll have to click around in a lot of spots to get it to work, and it can be very time consuming. It's very useful if, let's say, there's a white background here, and then you can just click on the white stuff and it would take all of that out. Most of the time that isn't the case. The next tool, which is a popular tool, is the quick selection tool. Now this one just more so looks for sharper boundaries. You can go around here, kind of get around Toxic a bit. So anytime you want to add stuff, you'll add it automatically does this for the quick selection tool, but Shift usually adds selections, and then Alt is how you remove selections. The icon right now that I'm working with is just too small, but let's say I bump that up. You'll notice it automatically has the plus icon, which is why Shift isn't necessary, but Alt changes it to a minus sign inside. So good note there. Now, if you're going to be using this quick selection, first thing you'll notice is that it's kind of jagged and it's not the best. It doesn't cut things out cleanly. So that's why a lot of people tend to not use it, or a lot of the higher tier designers will tend to not use it. One last low quality / medium quality method is to go to select, and you can go select and mask, and you can play around with a bunch of these values, and basically it's a very easy way to cut people out. And the best part about this is when you finish with whatever you want to do and you mess with these settings accordingly, hit OK. It doesn't delete the background, it just masks it out of there. So it's a very convenient way to do that. And then the last way and the most used way by the higher tier designers to cut things out is to use the pen tool. I won't go into a big description of how to use the pen tool right now, but you can just basically come around here if you want to be on shape mode. Come around here and do whatever you need to. I'm not doing it at the highest fidelity right now, but just to show you guys what I would do, make the shape, control click on the icon here to select it, and then you can either layer via copy, or if you want to, you'd have to rasterize this layer and make it not a smart object and do layer via cut and do it that way. What I usually tend to do is just duplicate the layer, so then you'll see that shape is kind of cut out of Toxic's face right there. So, few ways to cut people out, something that I know will probably be pretty useful for thumbnails for people. The next important thing is to go to the text tool. So, if you're on the text tool, just click anywhere, type in whatever you want to, choose whatever font, increase the sizing. Important thing here, there's multiple ways to mess with the font. You can either see a list of default fonts, you can type in whatever custom font number you want, or the way that I normally do it is hold control, and you'll notice that this turns into a slider now. So now you can just slide it this way, and I found that very convenient. Anywhere usually that there's numbers like this, you can control and slide. So even for zooming, control, click and slide like that to drag. So now, let's say that we make this text right here. Obviously, you can go here, click on this FX panel right here to add a layer style, or what I just tend to do is double click this and you'll see a bunch of layer styles here. If for some reason only a couple of them are showing up, you can go to the FX thing and then show all effects. And then whenever you create any sort of effect, I'm just going to put a ton of stuff on here. You can go to new style, and name doesn't really matter, I'm just going to name it like this. Hit OK, and that style will now pop up in the top over here to do that. Then another thing that people will tend to do in thumbnails, for example, is to warp the text. So the great thing is that unlike any other normal picture, if you warp text, and by that I mean edit, transform, warp, or if you're on the text tool, which is just hitting T on your keyboard, this right here will pop up that warp thing, and you can find the same warp styles. So if you go to arc, for example, you can mess around with that, do whatever you need to there, and a great way to make eye-popping text that you'll see in a lot of the 2K community's thumbnails. And then the next thing that I think is important to learn is the gradient masking tool, the gradient tool. So especially useful, I've given a tutorial on this before, but very useful for just blending stuff together, blending multiple images together. I'd recommend you guys check out that tutorial. Another useful feature within Photoshop is to take these pictures and transform them. So what I mean is skew like this, or just regular transform, resizing, or rotating the image however you want to. So there's a way to do that by just going to transform, and then you can do scale, rotate, and all this stuff. But what I prefer to do is, as much as possible, just click on the image and hit Control T. That puts you into free transform mode, which allows you to do multiple things at the same time. So for example, if I wouldn't want to do it with this picture necessarily, but if I wanted to just make this side kind of skew over to the left, hold Control over here, you'll notice the cursor changes, and you want to be on like one of these control boxes. So go ahead and do that, and you'll notice it kind of just skewing everything that way. And then if you do it in the middle, it'll basically, whatever axis that's on, it'll allow you to skew it in that fashion by holding Control. And then if you hold Shift on CC 2019, you can then control all of this that way. So that's how you use a skew function. Rotating function, you'll notice the rotating icon just pop up. So you can do a free rotate like this. It'll tell you what angle, if you're noticing right next to my cursor. But a lot of times we're going to want to rotate to like 90, 180, something like that. So what Photoshop does nicely is that all of those numbers are multiples of 15 degrees. So if you hold Shift, you can rotate in increments of 15, as you'll notice the numbers on my screen changing. So 75, 90, etc., etc. So if you want to accept this transformation, you hit Enter. If you want to back out, hit Escape on your keyboard. And you'll, also notice that there's controls up here you can mess around with to basically work this and stuff. If when you're resizing an image, you don't want the aspect ratio to change, which is basically the height, the width divided by the height, basically makes a picture look normal. So for example, if I hold Shift and I try to resize this, I'm only resizing one dimension. You'll notice it'll look, stretched in a certain direction. With CC 2019, if I don't hold Shift, it automatically resizes in scale for me. And then the last thing that I would want to talk about with images and transform is you go to Edit. This one you have to do, I believe, from the Edit menu. If you go to Perspective and click on a corner and do it, you'll notice both corners kind of do whatever. And it's the same method here. So if you were to hold Shift, then or actually Shift doesn't do it on this end. I forgot about that. But you can do it on any sort of axis like that and make things work. Alright, so now that we have some of the basic components of any thumbnail or header, basically those are the very just a background, text, and then maybe a cutout or something. We've covered all those. So now I want to go into a few of the Photoshop mechanics that I think are pretty useful for people to know about. So in the layer panel, you can get this panel right here. You can get several layers in here at one time, make a lot of stuff, and it can be pretty confusing. So what I like to do sometimes is you'll select this one, maybe hold Shift to select all the layers between this one and whatever you click, and then you can hit this icon to group them together, and then double click here to rename the group. I'm just gonna rename it that. And then if you want to ungroup it, let's say you just right click on the folder and then ungroup layers. And then you can also do Control. If you click here and then hold Control, click here as well and group those. What it'll do is it'll bump everything up to the topmost layer when making the group. So now you'll notice both of those just went above the picture right there. So groups are a nice, easy way to organize things. Here is the new layer button. And then here is the trash button, but I normally just use backspace or delete on my keyboard in order to delete those. The next thing I want to discuss in terms of Photoshop mechanics is blend mode. So if you click on any layer and use this scroll, you can go ahead and change the blend modes. So all of these blend modes are basically a mathematical formula for how the pixels in this layer interact with any of the pixels, any of the layers below it. So over time, as you start doing more design work, you'll tend to know ahead of time what some of these effects are going to do. Like screen will try and take most of the dark stuff out of an image and leave you with the lighter stuff. Linear dodge will just make stuff brighter, stuff like that. So you learn to, as you keep going with your designing, you'll learn what those blend modes actually do. These two, opacity just turns up and down how visible the image is Fill also will look like it's doing the same thing, but excuse me. Key distinction here is that if you turn down the opacity of a layer, you're turning down everything about that layer. So if I go ahead and put in any sort of stroke, anything like that, and then I turn down the opacity, that entire thing is going to be faded out. But if I just turn down the fill, only the image itself is being taken out, the layer styles stay there. Very key distinction, and it's a big way that a lot of people manipulate text. So for example, I can turn my fill all the way down, but I can go here and turn the stroke on, and now it's an outline text. You'll notice this on a lot of different headers out there in the 2K community. So but then you can throw whatever stuff you want, etc. on it, and you can make for some really cool effects. So that is the key distinction between fill and opacity that you should know going into this. The last thing within the layer panels that I did not go over yet with the original file is what's called as adjustment layers. So they're down here, but you can also go to adjustments up top here, and they're the same ones over here. These are something I definitely check out, especially like, for example, hue saturation. Can mess around with the hue of everything, or just hit colorize and make everything one color basically. This is also a very common effect within 2A community designs, but in general, just the adjustment panel of coming down here, let's say, and doing this. Key thing is that, let's say I have multiple pictures. I'm just going to duplicate this, and this is a different picture. Let's say you want this to only, you can either have this adjustment layer applied to everything below it, or just the one layer below it. So this is going to introduce the idea of a clipping mask if we wanted to just operate on this bottom layer right here. So you can either go to this icon within the properties tab, and this will basically clip it to that. Or what you can do is actually right click on it and create a clipping mask. So now that concept of a clipping mask is very useful when, for example, let's say I have both of these images like this. If I go over here and right click and create clipping mask, it's going to clip it into the bottom one, which means you cannot see this picture outside of the one that it's clipped to. These borders are effectively clipping the picture. So I think that's an important tool there that you'll want to learn how to use. So if you want to basically just chop off some of this stuff right here, let's say you want to just leave this column here with toxic open, what you could do is use the marquee select tool, which is a very important tool that you'll get to learn. It's basically what causes any of what are called the marching ants. So like they're just kind of going around like that in a slow pattern. So there's two options here. One is if you're sure you're just not going to need it and you don't want to deal with it, you can go ahead and hit delete. But let's say you're not completely sure whether you'll need it or not. What you can do is, if you're on the marquee tool, which is M, right click it and select inverse, and then go ahead and create a mask right here. And then that way, you'll still have it there. If for any reason you want that part back, you just go over here and delete the layer mask and you're good. The only downside to this is that whenever you then try to transform the layer, it's going to take whatever's technically part of the layer, even if it's not masked out. Or I mean, even if it is masked out. So if for example, let's say I went and actually deleted this, and then went ahead and Control T, then it just transforms that. But as you saw, if we just had this masked out, then it's going to select the whole thing when you try to transform. And just for future reference, if you ever get these around around the thing and you don't want them, Control D will deselect them, or Command D if you're on Mac. When you have the marquee tool here, you can always move this marquee around. But whenever you hit V, which is back to the main pointer tool, the main move tool, then now you'll notice the edge box kind of appeared. So now you can move that actual section around. Another common question is how to actually, once you're done with all of this, we've gone through a bunch of the mechanics right here. So one thing that I'm always asked is how do you actually export images in the correct way. So for thumbnails, for example, I'm going to go to File and I'm going to go to Export. I already have it set up to do quick export as PNG8, but you can always just go to Export as. PNG8 tends to be the best because it'll almost always ensure your thumbnail size is below 2 megabytes, which is the maximum size that YouTube allows. So if I go here and I click the smaller file, everything else should stay as you've seen it here, and you say export all, choose where you save it, and you're good to go. So with that, hopefully this video helped you guys out with some of the basics of Photoshop. Stay tuned for more installments for that esports design tutorial. I'll hopefully get some more of those videos in the coming weeks out there. So appreciate you guys for coming through. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment. Peace, y'all.